to communicate with us. We can't hear or see you in this webinar format, but we love getting questions throughout the program that we'll filter into the flow as best as we can. Go ahead and use the chat to ask questions throughout, but also please right now, just as a matter of practice, drop where you're calling from, and if you're running for office, what office you're running for. So I'll get us started by saying I'm calling from Maine, and I am the head of field and mobilization. And we'll get started in about 5 minutes. It's good to see everyone. I see candidates from all over. We got Ohio, we've got Paris, California, Utah, Washington State, Virginia, Texas, Atlanta, Portland, Maine. We got a little bit of everything. And hello to those of you who are watching directly in Circle as well. It's good to see everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We've reached enough of a critical mass of people. But again, this week we are talking about leveraging voter data. So this training is all about understanding voter files, how to target key voters, and ultimately use this for voter contact in getting out the vote. By the end of this training, the goal is for you to be able to develop your own structured approach to understanding voter files, targeting, and ultimately outreach, as well as implement the best practices and strategies that campaign experts would use when it comes to voter segmentation and targeting. And we're going to do a live demo on this call of how you can use goodparty.org's tools to optimize and ultimately track your progress throughout your campaign. So without further ado, I want to introduce our expert this week. Our expert is the political director here at goodparty.org. His name is Jared Alper. And Jared, please go ahead and introduce yourself and share some of your bona fides. Why are we reaching out to you to talk all things voter data?
Thanks, Rob. It's good to be back. It's been a minute, but I'm glad to see some familiar faces that are tuning in tonight. I'm Jared Alper, goodparty.org's political director. I lead our political team based out of Miami, Florida. A lifelong New Yorker. Before that, I made my escape about 40 years too early, as my parents are loath to say. Voter data is the lifeblood of what we do in campaigns. It's a huge piece of what we offer and what we work with every day here in support of our candidates at goodparty.org. I think every candidate who has ever run at some point in the journey has thought or been asked questions about acquiring if they didn't have voter data already and how to make use of it. And I think that it's a critical piece of the campaign infrastructure, something that we really, really lean into hard when we're coaching up candidates and preparing them on how to run and how to be the most effective versions of their campaigns and candidates that they can possibly be. And it's something that I think, despite making it a core offering of our pro tools, something that still is always going to be something that candidates will require coaching up to not just understand what's in the voter file, but to make the highest and best use of it. So I'm really happy to be here tonight to walk through not just what is in this spreadsheet that you may receive if you've already been a candidate using our tools, but also some practical examples and methods to take what's in these files, apply them in real life, and put yourself in the strongest position possible in every stage of your campaign journey.
Awesome. Well, I want to go ahead and thank everyone who submitted questions ahead of time when they registered for this call. But I do want to remind you that there's a Q&A function built into Zoom as well. So you can ask questions throughout the training as they come up. And if you do it in the Q&A button area, it'll build a good running list of questions that we can answer throughout the presentation. And feel free as well to use the chat box to communicate with us. We'll be checking in with that throughout the training tonight. But why don't we just go ahead and jump into the heart of it, Jared? Why is it so important to use and understand the voter file? I think it's maybe one of the very first offerings that we built as a part of goodparty.org's tools. Why did we start there?
It's the important question to answer. Voter data, as we've said many times over now for many years, Rob, is the navigation, pinpointing system of your campaign. It is the foundation by which candidates must make informed decisions that are strategic in nature, they're tactical in nature. It is the means by which the candidates understand their community in a way that is more than just sort of a narrative interpretation of what's going on around them. It's backed up with real points of information that can be used in a practical and applied way on their campaigns. And it's also used to make and then test assumptions, based on what's in the file. It gives candidates an opportunity to build, whether it's messaging, get out the vote strategies, opportunities to position themselves from a positions and policy standpoint. It gives them opportunities to make informed decisions that they can test over the course of their campaign. It's also the means by which candidates effectively target their voters, and not just target, but even identify whom they should be reaching out to, when and what the most effective means of reaching their voters are. And so with this voter file, candidates will have insight into demographic information, sort of first and foremost about their community, things like age, race, gender, household size information, a whole bunch of key data points about individuals and also just broadly the members of their community. You'll better understand voting behaviors. So who is likely to vote, when people voted most highly or lowly historically in the past. The political affiliation and breakdown of your community. This is a big one. I think a lot of times that's in fact where people's brains immediately go to, trying to figure out what percentage of my district are registered Democrats, registered Republicans, how many independents are there in my community, and how can I use that information to make decisions? And also the means by which you can best understand how to contact voters. Who is reachable by cell phones? Whose doors can you knock on? Who maybe are old school and have access to landlines? How can you target people online? All of that has to be used via voter data to be the most effective. And I'll wrap up sort of the intro to contrast it with sometimes where we run into candidates who don't have the voter file. Some folks may empathize or at the very least have experienced it themselves prior to having the lights turned on. But without a voter file, campaigns are not able to get into the weeds of their community. If they're making decisions, oftentimes they're maybe not as informed as they'd like them to be. Specifically, they're informed by things that they're sort of just hearing and seeing around them that may be not truly representative of what's going on in their community. It's what we call in politics flying blind. And the consequence of flying blind could be tremendous. It could be something that results in wasting time, or energy, or resources to reach voters whom you would have otherwise maybe not prioritized to reach out to right away, whether it's because they don't intend to vote, maybe they don't aren't even registered to vote to begin with, or live in your community, or have any intention of voting for a candidate like you, or against someone like you in this given election. So it's really important. It really is that like turn on the lights moment in a campaign, and the earlier that a campaign can do it, the better.
I love that analogy about flying blind. So just reflecting back some of what I'm hearing, to take that analogy even a step further, like voter data is basically a campaign's GPS and radar all rolled into one. It is what helps you to see the landscape clearly and understand who's in your community. It helps you to focus your time where it really counts. And without it, yeah, you're flying blind or driving with your eyes closed, right? Relying on guesswork and gut feelings and a whole lot of luck. And in my experience on campaigns, if you're counting on those things instead of hard work, you're in big trouble. So, having the voter file is one thing, using it well is a whole other thing altogether.
Yep.
Um, how do good campaigns leverage the information that's in the voter file?
Well, so the first thing that we encourage people to do, and we often are offering sessions for our pro candidates to walk them through the answer to this very question, but it's by taking the voter file and creating what we call audiences. And audiences are segments of your overall population that are built to target for a specific initiative or tactic or anything really that is intended to achieve the campaign's goals. So it's a proactive cutting of your voter file, essentially. And your candidate or their campaign staff is creating these audiences with the intent to actionably apply these people who are segmented together for a specific purpose. And so an example I often give is what we call voter ID. And if you're looking to identify voters, what you would do is you would create a segment of voters with the intent to test whether or not someone is going to or planning on voting in your specific election, or even especially with some of these local races that we've done earlier in the year where turnout is like sub 20%, whether they're even aware that there's an election going on in the first place. The way you would do that is by segmenting your broader voter file, right? If we give a completed large file, you would look for people's voting behavior and then make assumptions that a person who's voted in maybe 3 of the last 4 elections is likely to vote again, or maybe someone who's voted in 1 of the last 4 elections may not be likely to vote. And then you can test those assumptions by taking those audiences and reaching out to them, whether it's through knocking on doors, texting, calling, doing something to engage and test the voter file. And I think a lot of times people learn, I mean, the intent is to learn. Maybe someone who wasn't likely to vote because they haven't before would vote under different circumstances, and you're the candidate that they'll vote for. Maybe a candidate who is likely to vote in an upcoming election has only voted in the past because someone reached out to them. And if they weren't reached out to this year, they wouldn't vote again. And so the point is to create buckets of people, then take action to test whether or not what is in the voter file is going to bear out again.
Awesome. So I'm hearing essentially here that the key to using voter data well is turning it into actionable audiences.
Right.
You don't just stare at spreadsheets, you actually break the voter file into smart strategic segments based on things like voter history, voter behavior, demographics, etc. And I have a couple of questions already coming in that I think relate to that. Coming from Ronald in the chat, he says the median age in my city is 30. Would I have better luck with texting rather than yard signs? And I'm interested in your take on that, Jared.
You're teeing me up for a question I have strong opinions about.
Yep.
My feeling has always been that things that are one-to-one are the most effective. And so I understand, I begrudgingly will admit that yard signs do have a place in our political world. It's an opportunity, essentially like a billboard, to literally plant your stake in the ground and let people know you're running. But I always find that one-to-one communication is the most effective means of reaching people. And that's what the value of something like a text message is. You're sending one text to one voter. You can measure whether or not it was received, whether or not the person replied. And from what they reply, you'll have a better sense for, again, testing what is in the voter file. If you test someone who has voted in 4 of the last 4 elections, and your assumption is this person's definitely going to vote again, you might be surprised to learn if someone responds and says, I didn't even know there was an election happening. And that helps you test and probe and better understand your community in a way that you just can't get when you're not having one-to-one interactions with people, which is the core of what a yard sign offers.
Awesome. And another question about these kind of smart segments. This one comes from Sam Aborn, who's a city council candidate from Portland, Maine. He says that voter data shows that 50% of his city votes absentee. How can he best use that insight?
It's great. It's a great insight. And it's a perfect thing to apply. So if you see something like a segmentation of your community that is likely to vote early, what that tells you is that you need to reach those voters maybe earlier than you would intend to. There's a segment of your audience that you're getting feedback from the data that tells you that if I reach out to these people on election day, there's a good chance that they've already voted, and that's a missed opportunity. And so what that means as a candidate is to build a segment, target them early based on their voting behavior, and test whether or not those people are going to turn out to vote ahead of schedule.
Mm-hmm. Sam asked a smart follow-up question, and I think I'll also mention, I'll give a plug that we have a texting specific training that's happening in 2 weeks from now. So we'll give an even more in-depth answer to this question. But Sam asked, when should you send the first text message to the voter file for a November 4th election? And I'll let Jared answer this one, but the preempt that I'll give is that it depends on the purpose of the text. here in Maine, we had a gubernatorial candidate who's running as an independent who sent a text message announcing the launch of his campaign and sent another text message shortly afterwards doing fundraising on the back of the really good press coverage that he received around that announcement. That campaign is probably going to text multiple times along the way to their November election that takes place. That works for some larger campaigns, but doesn't work for all campaigns. Generally speaking, for voter contact for a November campaign, we usually recommend starting texting around when early voting starts, because that's when people tune in, especially for these down ballot positions. But Jared, do you have anything to add on timeline for the earliest texts that you send out? And if you do send something, prior to your voter contact wave, when do you send those?
So it is, I think you teed it up nicely in that not every candidate has the exact same playbook earlier in their campaign, but I do believe that later in the race is when the timeline starts to be more standardizable. And so I think if the spirit of the question for a November election is when should I start really pushing my foot on the gas to get out the vote, and the segment of your voter audience that you've created is specifically turning into people who I think are going to participate in the election in November, it's typically after Labor Day, shortly after Labor Day, when that sort of activity really starts to start in earnest. Now, you may not want to wait until after Labor Day, but I think the intent of your messaging is less going to be focused on go out and make a plan to vote, make sure you vote for me, the election's coming up. It's going to be more top level. Are you aware that there's an election? I want to introduce you to who I am and why I've decided to run for this election, why I'm the best candidate to serve. That can happen in August, June, July, but it's all about defining the intent of who you're reaching out to and why, and then making sure that you time it accordingly.
Mhm. One last quick tag on about texting, and then I'll get us back to talking about effective voter file strategies. How do you strike the balance between overload and too many texts, and what is effective?
I think it really is, in many ways, an exercise in feedback. So the formula that we use, the playbook, is based around this idea that you have to reach your voters a certain amount of times, generally no less than 3 times each via text, in order to ensure that you are doing everything you can to get them out to vote. That does not mean you exclusively do text messaging, and it certainly doesn't mean that every single person needs to receive a text message. But generally speaking, texts are a big piece of the formula. And the goal is to use this as a tool to effectively reach voters quickly and in a personal way. We have seen candidates based on the extent and dynamics of their race choose to text different groups at different cadences, send more texts than that sort of floor of 3. For example, if you're running against an incumbent, you may want to do more aggressive outreach than if you were an incumbent yourself or if you were running in an open seat. If your community is very, very condensed and you can knock on doors more effectively, you may lean into door knocking as a tactic. And there are some communities where robocalling or live phone calling or digital advertising makes more sense than text messaging, and you would lean more heavily into that tactic. Generally speaking, it's based on the feedback you receive. Some communities don't like to be texted more than others. And if the response to your text messaging campaign is ubiquitously not interested, it tells you maybe we need to either change the messaging or change the tactics. So it really is an exercise of keeping your finger on the pulse, being responsive and using the data to learn, not to just make assumptions and then not pivot away from them.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for those questions and keep them coming. I see a couple more building up in the queue. But Jared, I wanted you to talk a little bit about what strategies have proven to be the most effective in past campaigns when it comes to utilizing the voter file.
Yeah, there's a strategy that I think is very top of mind for political folks that I want to define because I think sometimes it's misunderstood. But for those who've heard the phrase micro-targeting, let's get into the weeds on what micro-targeting is. And so a micro-targeting strategy is really when you combine oftentimes the attributes of 2 or even more audiences to create a really, really specific and highly granular audience for a very specific purpose. It may not always be the practical case. So this is sort of the disclaimer that not every candidate must micro-target their district. And in fact, I sometimes see that there's a risk where if you get too into the weeds and you really try and get so granular that you spend a lot of time and the juice isn't really worth the squeeze, generally the size of your district and the resources available to you in terms of your budget is a good gut check against if you're getting too into the weeds on micro targeting. But towards the ends of the campaign, if you find yourself in a situation where maybe you want to add one last time intensive tactic, for example, door knocking, and you can only knock 100 doors in the final weekend of your campaign, you will likely want to micro target and say, who are the 100 doors that I should be reaching out to? And it might be people who are 100%, who I am most confident are going to vote because they've voted in 100% of every single election that's happened in the last 4 years. Maybe they are under the age of 35, and as a young candidate, maybe that's your audience. And maybe they're households that have 3 or more people in them, so you get the most bang for your buck. And you would combine those 3 audiences, morph them up into one really tight micro-targeted audience, and go out and hit those 100 doors. And the assumption you're making is if you do that, that's going to be the thing that puts you over the top. And so micro-targeting is a really great example of a very specific strategy that might be right for some. It may not always be right for all. And you want to sort of balance the idea of, building your audiences in a smart and thoughtful way versus getting too into the weeds of the data. And then the other strategy I would flag really is this notion of being really proactive and thoughtful in creating specific audiences for specific purposes. So when we deliver data to our candidates, we coach them up on how to really use the data to be organized. Not every voter can be reached the exact same way, and a really effective campaign will create audiences with the intent to reach each voter in the audience in a way that is different from separate audiences. So for example, creating a text audience, creating a doors audience, creating a robocall audience, maybe creating like a volunteer base that you would send people out to. But the point is that each of these people are receiving a different and specific tactic. And in that way, you are reaching voters in a way that's proactive and separate from the other tactics that you're doing. You're getting the most leverage out of your resources, and you're ensuring that each person in each list is being hit for a certain purpose.
Awesome. So again, a part of what I'm hearing with all of this is that the worst thing you can do is fall in love with your assumptions, essentially. And one of the best things that you can do is ask questions to try to prove yourself wrong. Like that's where insights, actionable insights, ultimately come from. And with micro targeting, do you have any specific examples of micro targeting that has worked or that you've seen on campaigns that you can share with people that just drive the point home?
Yeah, so we're working actively on even helping use our AI to micro target data in a way that is deliverable for candidates. And the one thing that we are really pushing aggressively, especially towards the end of elections, is the idea of micro targeting based on precincts. And so this is something where if you're flying blind, the pain might be even most profoundly felt because you might be standing at a poll on election day, only to learn later that it was the wrong poll. So for candidates who are here, and maybe you're thinking about this already, if someone were to say, what are you going to do on election day? Oftentimes we've seen candidates will say, I'm going to the poll closest to my house because that's where I vote. That's where I'm going to park and hang out. And we've seen and felt candidates who go to the poll that's most convenient and that's where they voted. And they shake all 6 hands of all 6 voters who voted that day. And then later, when we look in and do the postmort, we'll say, what we should have done is we should have looked at the precincts where the greatest percentage of the vote is coming from. And it turns out that your precinct was not in the top 5. So what we will tell candidates now is look at the precincts, create an audience based on the likelihood to vote in each individual voting center, and then build your strategy that way. And you might find that out of the 10 precincts, the top 5 contribute 70% of the vote. And that tells you that on election day, you need 5 people at those 5 precincts as a priority action, even if it's not the one that's closest to your house, and even if it's not the one where you go and vote.
I love that. I love that. I know about another tight school board race where a campaign had identified a cluster of high propensity or very likely to vote senior voters who tended to vote by mail or vote early. And they leaned conservative, but They were also shown through the voter data to be likely to support public education. And so the city councilor segmented that group and made sure that they dropped a tailored mailer that showed the candidates' support for senior tax exemptions, but also that they supported local school funding. So it highlighted the sort of two different policies that it seemed like cared the most about them. And they made sure that that mailer landed a week before ballots arrived. And they won a surprising bump in early support from that older audience. And it was an audience that was expected to go for the more conservative candidate. So another example of that micro-targeting in action. Tara Martinez asks, how do we feel about listening sessions and house parties, community events for a smaller district? How could the voter file be used to help support a listening session or house party or community event strategy? I'm thinking this could be potentially a good use of text messaging.
Yep.
What do you think, Jared?
I think that it's a perfect application. So first and foremost, I think the idea of doing listening sessions and small, I like to call them friend raisers, is a terrific way for a candidate to start building a network and to introduce themselves in really meaningful and tight ways to their community. And oftentimes the first sort of tranche of people who will be there are the folks that are connected to the campaign or to the host. But I think that by sending texts out ahead of some events like this, especially if it's at a place that's recognizable, you are going to get exposure. You're going to be able to extend invitations to people who maybe wouldn't have otherwise been able to join or have been aware that an event was happening. And you can even do that based on the proximity to the location. So we've done this before where Rob and I both, when we were on site in years past, we would send targeted text messages to people who live near locations where we were organizing events and seen real reward come out of that because someone receives a text and says, oh, I live 5 minutes away from this really cool location that I'm familiar with. And there's this organization that seems to be aligned with how I feel, doing something that I might want to learn more about. It's only going to take 5 minutes to get there. Why wouldn't I show up?
Mhm. So another targeting question here. Marilee is in an election where all the votes are vote by mail. It's a compulsory vote by mail state.
Yep.
I'm guessing Washington. I think that's the one. So for an election in a state like Washington, where all or a majority of the votes are vote by mail, what do you think?
Well, first, don't sleep on Utah because I think
Oh yeah,
Utah's
that's right.
don't sleep on Utahns. Um, I think that the universal mail voting is a really good practical example of using the election calendar to be really strategic and targeted in when you do outreach to voters. And so I think a lot of candidates, maybe whose elections tend to follow this sort of traditional early voting and then election day approach, will mark down November 4th of this year as the date that they need to really anchor their outreach in. But whether it's early voting or the universal date that all of the ballots are going to be shipped, the candidates can make really selective and intelligent decisions about reaching out to their voters. So, Marilee, I would highly recommend that if you know and the date those ballots are going to be sent out, plan an outreach effort, whether it's text, doors, calls, all of the above, and try and time your outreach to when people are going to be receiving their ballots. And you would be maybe even surprised at the impact that someone opening up their mailbox, getting their ballot, and then receiving a text from a candidate has on turning out the vote and getting people connected to campaigns, especially when they have big decisions to make.
So our next question comes from Wesley in Maryland. Wesley asks, do you track the campaigns you support? And can you provide what percentage of the time those candidates win? And we absolutely do. Last year, we helped to elect 3,444 candidates all across the country. And Jared, I'll let you talk about the percentage of candidates that win. But I think broadly speaking, candidates on our platform win at one rate, but then the candidates who are Good Party Pro users win at an even higher rate. And that's in large part because they're using the voter data that we make available to them. So if you can highlight those two win rates, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, it's substantially higher. I mean, the candidates that we have who are leveraging the tools that we work with, who are pro candidates and who hit their voter contact goal, they're winning upwards of 60% of the time. The candidates who are even maybe getting access to the voter data but not leveraging it will sometimes win less than 30% of the time. And the reason is, again, like you sort of highlighted at the onset, Rob, it is possible to win without voter data. It has happened, but I would be very hard pressed to imagine many candidates who feel like they took the smoothest landing in their campaign. And the whole point of these tools is to position the candidates in the strongest possible way to have the most success on election day. It's about putting the cards in the deck in your favor and doing the things that really organized, well-run campaigns do. It can never, we would never be in a position where we would suggest that it guarantees a win, nor would we say that if you don't leverage voter data, you're guaranteed to lose. But we're much more confident that the candidates who leverage the resources to reach their voters in a thoughtful and intelligent way are going to have a more effective campaign and a more positive experience.
Awesome. And while we're talking win rates, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the people who are watching us now in Circle, our Circle community. So far this year, candidates who have had election in Circle have won between 60 to 70% of their races. So I'll ask Emily or Kiara to please drop that join Circle link into the chat for anyone in our community who wants to drive up the chances of them winning even more. We have conversations every day about best practices on campaigns, and you can ask questions just like you're doing on this call, but across our messaging board, and we'll answer those as quickly as we can. A couple more questions, and these are specifically about goodparty.org's data, and then we'll get into talking about some mistakes to avoid with data. Number one, what is the difference between the data that goodparty.org provides and what a candidate might receive from the state? And can you address basically the quality of the data? And this comes from Arthur.
Great question. The voter data that states provide, one, is not always consistent. Some states are really good about providing at a very low cost a lot of information about their community. Other states, it's like pulling teeth and you get a very choppy, incomplete file that's difficult to use at a high price. Fortunately for us, first and foremost, it's fixed. We offer the voter file to candidates as part of the pro subscription for $10 a month, no matter how big or how small your district is. The thing to understand about the states, even the best states in terms of data, they are providing this data directly to the voter files, the voter file platforms, including the one that we work with. And then what those companies will do is they will take the data and enrich it. They'll add information that the states don't have access to or aren't interested in putting together, whether that's contact information, demographic information, consumer information. They build their voter files so that they are more comprehensive to go back in time for history as well. So, for example, if you request a voter file from the state, it'll tell you maybe if they voted in the last 4 elections. I think our voter file can go back into the mid-1990s, and it's enriched and updated more frequently. So I can give you a very personal and practical example. In December, I moved from New York City to Miami, Florida. I changed my voter registration in January to register to vote in my new home. And my voter file has since been updated. I've checked, and my voting behavior moves with me, almost like a virtual voting passport. So for someone, if they were to target, me personally in Miami, they would see that I'm an active voter. I've voted in many elections over almost all of them over the last 10 plus years. And even though none of them were in Miami yet, they will understand that I'm an active voter. That information came with me. The state of Florida doesn't have that information on yet.
Awesome. Well, let's get back into those mistakes to avoid.
Sure.
What are some of the common pitfalls that you think that candidates or campaign managers can fall into when it comes to voter data?
I'm going to highlight 2. I think in many ways it's sort of exactly the opposite of what we've already covered to date. But the 2 words of wisdom that I would offer are, one, make sure that you're using the voter file to learn about your community. I think it's the single largest takeaway on the do's and also on the opposite end, the don'ts. And failing to learn from what's in the voter file really does start with not asking questions about your campaign's goals and your tactics. So when you receive the data and you're going through it, the questions that I would prompt a candidate to ask, and I would encourage everybody on this call to ask about themselves, is what are you hoping to learn and achieve from this voter file and the audiences that you may create from it? And how will you know if whatever you were doing was successful? And if you can't answer those questions, or if you never ask them, those assumptions that you're making, even if you are making assumptions, you won't necessarily know if, when, or what you've learned as a result of doing the things that you know you need to be doing. And I would encourage candidates to be thoughtful, but also don't get too attached to the assumptions that you're making. And that is the second point. These assumptions are meant to be tested. They are meant to be learned from. You may find that some of the things that you thought to be true that was backed up in the data is not the case. The winning candidate does not continue to ram their head against the wall and say, I'm going to prove the community wrong and that these people in fact do vote every single time. I just need to reach them more. But it is about testing and learning from the things that you're doing and not making the same potentially mistake twice. If you do it once and it's not correct, it's not necessarily a mistake, but refusing to learn from the data is a mistake that is incredibly avoidable. And so we don't want our candidates to be stubborn. We want our candidates to assume that the data is a resource that is not, 100% infallible. And we want to make sure that you're using this data to answer questions, learn from it, and then move on in the event that something is not as consistent as you might have thought it would be. Oop, you're muted, Rob.
Yeah, sorry. Again, what I'm hearing here is don't get lost in the weeds, essentially. Data is something that should drive action and not delay it. I heard you talk about the dangers of over-targeting, and that idea, if you make a universe so small that you're sending, 5 text messages out, for example, it's probably too small, right? You probably got into the weeds a little bit too much. And then there's the importance of asking why, right? Like every tactic should teach you something. Do you have any, I don't know, voter data horror stories, specific examples of when things went wrong, things that folks can try to avoid on their end?
I have two. I think the first one, and it's a recommendation that may sound counterintuitive, but every candidate at some point will have people who come and say, how can I help? And I think a lot of times the reaction from the candidate is, I'm going to get this person to knock on doors. I'm going to try and really leverage this person to reach my voters. Don't worry about me. I'll be the one under the, in the back room with the data, cutting up the voter file. And what I find is that the candidates who are the most invested oftentimes spend the most amount of times behind the keyboard, looking at the voter data and slicing and dicing their turf. And what that means is they're not the ones getting out into the community and selling the vision. And so it's not always possible. And I don't think that every single candidate who's ever existed is the one who gets lost in the weeds in the data. But if it's possible, I would certainly recommend either, set some constraints on yourself to make sure that you put the computer down and get out into the community and actually use the data. Or if it's possible, bring someone else in, whether it's a partner. I've seen candidates give the job to their children, volunteers, anybody, to make sure that the candidate has like an internal check to make sure that they're not getting lost in the weeds. And then I think in terms of a practical sort of misuse of the data, it just comes back to continuing to retarget in a grand way the same group without learning anything. So if you're spending resources, knocking on doors to communities where you're making an assumption, maybe it's a political assumption that if I knock on the door of progressive independents, they're going to be the people who back me. And you find from their feedback that this group, for whatever reason, is not as inclined to support you, I wouldn't continue to go back to the well. I think you either have to refine your messaging or refine your targeting. But if you continue to target the same group without making any changes, that's really where trouble can start brewing.
Yeah, I heard a little bit of a horror story about a candidate who's running in Burlington who started their voter contact work pretty early. And the voter file was right in this instance. It told them there are all of these likely progressive voters who were college students. And they targeted them, they delivered mailers to these people. And the problem was that most of these people who are living in off-campus apartments, they graduated in June. So by the time that the voting rolled around in November, the people who they had communicated, who they had door knocked, who they had actually spoken to, they had successful conversations with because they trusted the voter file. They had moved on by September of that month or that year. Most of these people had moved back to the places that they lived. So more examples about ways that this targeting work can go wrong.
Yeah, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't drop our reference. It's not a strictly speaking true one, but from one of our a movie that we used to talk about in our campaign training, where a candidate really leans way too deep into the data, and they send a targeted mailer to I think it was a large group of single women who were really interested or had really strong opinions about contraception or birth control, and they were a progressive leaning campaign, so they thought this is our people, and it turned out that they sent this mailer to a convent, a group of nuns, and the line in the movie is, "Then that's exactly how many are going to vote for us, nuns of them."
Yeah, that's from that movie Irresistible, and I believe that is based on a true story of a mistake that was made in Wisconsin in an election. Mike asked me to ask about micro targeting. This is in the chat, Jared. Essentially, why micro targeting more than 5 segments might be too many. He has an unusually large district in Duval County. Is it maybe safer to suggest avoiding targeting too small of a percentage of voters? And as a follow-up question, are there a common 5 that you recommend considering for segmentation? And I'll say 5 is not a hard and fast rule by any means. A percentage of voters, larger campaigns in general would have multiple segments. But Jared, in terms of voter counts or percentage of voters, what do you think is a good rule for Mike to follow?
It honestly really does depend on the tactic. So if you're knocking on doors, the fraction is going to be very different than if you're sending out texts. I think that it really does come down more than anything to budget and time that's available to a campaign. So if you wanted to send a text message and you're in a community of 100,000 people, for example, I would think it might be excessive to send a text to a micro targeted audience of like 900. I think that if you remove one filter and up that to 2,200, 2,300, 3,000, you're still getting pretty micro targeted, and the extra time spent in really getting into the weeds and alienating out, a good chunk of that community is not going to necessarily extract as much value as if you broaden the scope out. On the other side, if you're knocking on doors and you can only knock 100 doors, getting more specific makes a lot of sense. And in terms of the filters that generally I think are most frequently applied, age, political affiliation, anything related to demographics like age, gender, race, language is a big one, right? If you're trying to target people based on their native language, that's an important thing to understand about your community. Even ideology, if someone has strong opinions about any given issue, that might be a really effective way of figuring out who you should be targeting.
Awesome. Well, this feels like a good opportunity to give Jared a little bit of a speaking break and bring Tevin Bell on camera. Tevin is going to walk us through a demo now of how you can use goodparty.org's tools on targeting, on voter file work. So Tevin, go ahead and introduce yourself and show us how to put all of these good learnings into action.
Hey, everybody.
Back and we're going to do one last roundup of Q&A. So this is a great time.
Oh no.
I
to be
think
dropping your final questions.
Okay, there we go. We lost you for a sec there, Rob, but we're back. So yeah, hey everybody. I'm a senior product manager here at goodparty.org, which means it's really my job to study the people who use our tools and make them better and easier for you all. We've had a lot of exciting developments, especially recently. I'll get to show off some of those a little bit later on. But I want to start off with just some of the basics around voter data, and then we'll get into some new interesting methods I personally found for analyzing data. And then we'll get into using a lot of that data to do better outreach. Okay, so like we mentioned before, voter data is something that we include in our pro tier. So here I'm on a pro test account, and I'm on the voter data page. So we include a variety of essentially stock voter files here, just anyone with an address, anybody with a cell phone, anybody with an address for direct mail or social for digital advertising or landlines for what we've got here as phone banking. And these are good starting points. It gives you a great way to know if, let's say here, I've clicked into the entire voter file and we've got 2,900 people, but let's say I wanted to take a look at people who I could text. 1,700 in this particular district in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, where I used to live. I like it because it's a nice small one to test with. None of the numbers look super intimidating, unlike King County, where I currently live, where everything's in the hundreds of thousands. So this gives you a decent idea of really what percentage of your voters that you can reach with any given tactic. So here, texting is pretty decent with 1,700 out of the 3K. Not as good as you might see in a more urban area, but I think still here, a valid tactic to be using. We also let you create custom voter files. So here, let's say I'm looking for doing a door knocking campaign. In the middle of my campaign, we give you a variety of filters that you can choose from. These are the most popular filters, which is why we've included them. We've got some plans to include some more filters later. So if there's anything in particular that you want to see here, please do throw it into the chat. I do take a look at these chats and I find them a great spot to help me do my job by getting your all's like firsthand feedback.
Kevin, I don't think you're screen sharing.
Oh, really? Oh no, Rob, did I forget the most important part of the entire demo? Here we go. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so with a little bit more context this time for all of you, these are our default voter files that we do offer. And you can click into any one of them. This is what happens when you click into the all fields. You can see here those 3,000 voters that I was talking about, or here I've clicked into texting and you can see the 1,700 that I was talking about earlier. In terms of actually creating those custom voter files, you can do that through here. So I'll recreate that same thing. You can see here, we've got the foremost, oh, and thank you for whoever said I have nice hair. This is me not cutting it for a year because I'm lazy. Thanks, Mike. So yeah, these are essentially most common filters that you'll be using. Obviously, political party gives you a bit of a lean of the people who might support the same ideologies you do. Age is a very useful one, oftentimes, and you'll see in a second, oftentimes age plays a role either in party leaning or the ways that people can be contacted. Gender, if that's important to your particular set of policies. And then the big one here, how likely people are to vote. Obviously, you could have a strategy that focuses on turning out first-time voters, or maybe you're going for something a little bit more proven, where you just want to target kind of the super voters that have been voting more often. And you can create a lot of different custom voter files. Like Jared and Rob said, don't go too crazy spending your time in here. Always better to be out there, actually spreading your message, telling the story of your campaign. But this data helps you get a bit of a leg up in how you do that. Okay, so this next piece is something that I recently discovered, and I think is an incredible tool for you all to be using. We actually don't build it, but one of the biggest companies in the world does. So I went and downloaded my voter file. I'll show you exactly where you can do that. You can download your voter file here. These are thousands and thousands of lines long often, so it doesn't really make sense for us to be showing them here. though I've got some plans to do that later on. You can download your voter file and actually just upload it to Google Sheets. Entirely free. If you've got a Gmail, you've got access to Google Sheets. And what I did here was I selected it all, and I just came up here to data, asked it to analyze the data. And you can do this as many times as you want. I don't think Google really limits this much. But it just prompted Gemini to analyze the data in the sheet. And it gave me a couple of like pretty clear takeaways here. So for this particular voter file, there's more Republicans than there are Democrats. And then nonpartisan voters are a third largest group, with smaller ones for third parties, which gives me, if I was actually running here, a decent idea of how I might want to target my message to some of these different voters with their different political leanings. This also happens to be a little bit of an older district. Average age of relatively close to retirement, and the median age even closer, including a couple people who are now centenarians, which I found pretty interesting. So this can help you determine what tactics you want to be using or how you want to be sharing your message. And then in terms of ethnic composition, this is a particularly European descent district. So that could help inform your own tactics as well. I asked it for some charts, gave me some charts. We can see here that, definitely more Republicans, fewer Democrats, nonpartisans outnumbering all of the third parties combined. And then gave me the same for age, which I've found to be a pretty useful chart. Obviously, we've got a little bit of a hump here with younger voters, and then especially about to retire recent retirees falling off, as you'd imagine. And then I even went a step farther and I asked it for voters with addresses, landlines, and cell phones. How does the demographic breakdown work? And then here you can see for people with landlines, no cell phones, tend towards Republican, very small third party, tends towards women, not so much men. And then average age here is higher than the average in the district. So like I said, completely free tool. You can all go do this, download your voter files, throw them into Google, and you can do this a few different times. Like with all of the new AI tools, it'll never give you exactly the same answer twice, but it will give you a variety of useful answers. So you can ask it to do this multiple times, see what comes up more often than other things, and use that. And honestly, that didn't take me more than, I want to say, 4 clicks and 3 minutes. So highly recommend this especially if you're not super experienced with data analysis, as a way to really just help you through what can otherwise be a pretty intimidating voter file with lots of different information for a lot of different people. I found that to be incredibly helpful. Then I'll wrap it up here with really how to use this data. So we recently released a voter outreach page, which supplements the task list you'd see on the dashboard, and lets you start putting out different campaigns, even if they're outside of the campaign plan that we offer to you. And these are one of the biggest ways that you'll be using your voter data. If I want to go start to send a text message, it really starts with who's your audience. And so you can take some of the analysis you've done and start cutting your voter file and using it in this outreach. Same with door knocking, same with robocalls. And then the last thing I want to do is how you could use some of those insights to take a piece of content that you've generated. Here, I've I've gone to our content builder. I've taken a look at what an SMS for election day might look like. And this is a good generic message that'll work if you're trying to send something out to everybody in your district. Where you can get a little bit more slick with this is coming up here to regenerate and saying, hey, I know that most people with cell phones in my district tend towards an age range of 18 through 25 and tend towards whatever X political party. And then all you do is click create. I won't sit here and make you all watch a loading screen for a few seconds. But what that does is it'll regenerate this with those new instructions in mind, allowing you to more easily target and more quickly target small segments. If you're trying to send out texts to younger people and do phone banking with older people, or door knock people in a certain district and or a certain precinct, and a little bit more about those people, you can really use that regenerate to help you essentially equip yourself better for micro-targeting with effective tactics. Okay. And now I'll stop the screen share that I did forget in the first place. But thanks, Rob. Back to you all.
Great. So we're going to dive into a round of Q&A now. I see about 10 questions built up between the folks on Circle and the folks here in Zoom. I believe our call producer is going to drop a survey first, though, to get a little feedback on this training. If you can all respond to that would be helpful. But going ahead and diving into the Q&A, Jared, I'll start this one for you. Does learning from the data require you to phone each voter and ask questions, or a subset of voters in specific audiences? How do you learn from this voter data, essentially?
Yeah, good question, because I know we've hammered learning from the data, but we want to make sure you're learning effectively. And I don't believe that you need to conduct a poll in response to your data necessarily to get the most out of it. I think that the purpose is to make sure that you have systems, and oftentimes our tools will provide you more than sufficient information to gauge whether or not your tactics were effective. For a text message, for example, how many people are replying, how many people are opting out of your messaging, what are the quality of the replies that you can assess individually. That will give you more than enough information to know whether or not you're barking up the wrong tree, or that you've really struck a tone with people and should continue doubling down on it. If you use a door knocking application like ours, we have a partnership with a company called eCanvasser. You can record in real time the responses you're getting at the doors. That will tell you, again, the quality of the interactions that you're having and how they compare against the assumptions that you've made. You certainly do not need to micro-target the data even further to say, hey, let's individually make sure that each person is having a positive experience, or that each person is a data point into the assumptions that we're making. I think that would be when you get into a little bit of overkill territory.
Perfect. Looking at the next question here, what are some tools to merge other lists with goodparty.org's data? Arthur has a list of multi-family buildings that he wants to segment, since he's unable to door knock those. I don't fully understand the question here, Arthur. But in terms of the first half of that, being able to supplement data or add data and merge information, what would that look like, Jared?
I think the question is, how can you take existing data and plot it against the data that you may have from other sources? There are tools that are out there that we certainly are not in the business of providing CRM solutions to candidates, though that's something that is on our roadmap for the future. Looking at you, Tevin, to help us build. But there are solutions that some candidates will leverage that can take multiple different sources of data and combine them, and then they can be used to more specifically, like get, in the weeds when you have to merge data together. I don't necessarily know often if that's something that every single candidate needs to do. So in your example, it sounds like you've identified a segment of voters, probably based on an address, that are not eligible to be door knocked because you can't get into their apartment complex. As someone who's door knocked in Manhattan, you have my sincerest sympathies and empathies. And I think that that's evidence enough of saying, okay, I don't believe that this is a group that's eligible to be door knocked. How do we reach them through a different means of communication, which could be mail, it could be texts, calls, a variety of those things. Another pro tip, by the way, if you're in a place where there are apartment complexes, going into like the lobby or speaking to the whether it's an event manager or a board member of the complex, many of these places do actually host candidate forums or will give you the opportunity to meet the residents of the apartment complexes in like the shared guest areas, or if there's a like a communal facility, there are opportunities to organize there. I would certainly suggest you do not go door to door in an apartment building. If somehow you gain access, that is a very quick way to be, in my experience, violently removed from the property.
So Paul Inman asks, what are two tests or suggestions that we can do to make sure that it's working? So how do you validate your assumptions about data as you're making them? Particularly, I think this would be useful in segmenting.
Yeah, I think that, okay, so let's say you wanted to even run a test. You may say, I'm going to reach out to a pool of voters and create sort of competing audiences. People who are likely to vote, maybe they vote, 3 out of the last 4 elections, and people who will vote 1 of 4 elections, and then test the tactic. Send each group a distinct but similar text message and see what the replies are. And I think you'll be able to, whether it's based on the reply rate, the quality of the replies, the opt-out rates, you're going to get a really strong sense for which audience has resonated most specifically with your messaging. The same can be true for doors. Same can be true for replies to emails that you might send, social media advertising. The idea is, in order to test your assumptions, you have to be able to test it against something else. Or run a test on one individual tactic, but be really attuned to the responses, right? Make assumptions of what you think is going to happen. And if what you experience is not aligned with your sort of strategy, it informs you that maybe there's something that needs to be adjusted. And again, that does not always necessarily mean that you have to scrape the voter file and throw it in the garbage. It does mean you have to look holistically at the campaign. Did you say is your messaging aligned with the purpose of your intent? Is the audience appropriate for what you were saying? Is there a more effective means of reaching the specific group of voters? Again, you don't have to, throw the baby in with the bathwater, but you do want to make sure that you're asking thoughtful questions in response to your tactics.
I see the question in the chat here from Wesley about the tools that we're demoing. Those are goodparty.org's tools. The message above your last comment shows you where you can sign up for those, but those are the tools that we build internally here at Good Party.
Oh, and then the other tool that I was using for showing the CSV and doing the analysis, that was Google Sheets. So you can just Google it. Google has essentially a free version of Excel that they offer that's really good.
Great. So another question coming from the Zoom call, Shalaya asks, how can the data be used to engage new voters? As 80% of voters already are in certain corners. So the best way to get new incoming voters, especially people who might be missing from the voter file because they just filed to vote.
Yeah, so those voters actually should be included in the file, assuming that they registered, within the period that the file itself was last updated. And generally, most voter file providers will update their data no less than once a quarter, and we receive it in real time. Closer to elections, they may even update it more frequently, but the standard is you would expect the data to be refreshed about 4 times a year. And you can look for people who have registered since the previous election. So in practical terms, right, if you're looking to target voters this year who are fresh and new and have yet to have an opportunity to vote in an election, they turn 17 or 18 years old, depending on the country or the state, since 2024. You can actually say, I'd like to pull a voter file for people who have registered to vote. Their registration date was after November 5th of last year, up to today. And we can pull out that segment of people and say, these are the new voters who have yet to have an opportunity to cast their ballot.
How can someone using goodparty.org utilize the voter file with texts or the robocaller? Essentially, how do they queue up a campaign for texting or robocalling using our voter file? This comes
Go
from
right.
Randy Wilson in Washington.
Randy Wilson in Washington, do I have an answer for you? You can go right into your dashboard, hit voter outreach, and then follow the prompts. You'll be able to build your voter file. You'll be able to select the filters. You'll be able to submit the scripts. You'll be able to do 90% of the work, and then a member of our team will take the last leg of the way. We'll be in touch with you. Nothing ever gets sent without a candidate's approval, and then we'll report back with that key learnings and metrics on how the campaign performed. So it is a managed service. It's something we're happy to offer our candidates. All they have to do is go into their product and follow the prompts to schedule the campaigns.
Yeah. And again, in 2 weeks on July 24th, Thursday, July 24th, we have an entire dedicated training that is going to focus on texting, phone calling, and robocalling that we're going to bring the infinitely talented Derek Lane on to be the expert for. So tune in for that in 2 weeks. Another great question from Hans Abbey. As we get closer to the election, will we be updating who's voted by mail? This is standard practice as you get closer to the elections. As Jared mentioned, all of these voter file providers tend to update more frequently as you get into the end of an election, and updating those vote by mail records and who voted early, for that matter, in person is a huge part of that and is essential for being able to run a smart ballot chase program. So smart question, and the answer is yes. And then there's a question here from a Zoom attendee. How does one get their pro rep to truly coach and evaluate a candidate's game plan? Can I request a specific pro rep? And you're asking the right person, because Jared runs our team of pro reps. I'll caveat at the beginning here and say that the entire political team at goodparty.org is immensely talented. We have a very small team of people. This organization does not turn a profit. We are a public benefit corporation, and we do have a tight team who is trying to service as many candidates as possible. But Jared, to the question here about the level of support that your team provides to candidates, and also that question of requesting a specific pro rep, can you answer to that?
Yeah, we're happy to have conversations if people well, first and foremost, we always are looking for feedback. So if there's something obviously that we could be doing better, we always want to hear about it. If we want to know if there's a way that we can improve the experience, we're always welcome to do it. And even if that means working with a PA for whatever reason, we can have conversations individually about how to ensure the experience is a positive one for our candidates. The thing to understand is, like Rob said, we're not a political consulting practice. We're not necessarily any one individual candidates. I shouldn't say necessarily. We are certainly not any one individual candidate's dedicated campaign manager. I do feel sometimes that the expectation gets morphed into this person is going to be like my person. They're going to be available to me 24 hours a day. And as much as we'd love to do that, we're working to service a lot of candidates. And so for us, what we do, every single candidate gets onboarded to the tool. We'll actually produce a custom and bespoke campaign plan just for you, and make sure that we are receptive to your feedback. We share it with you. In fact, we ask that the candidates mark up these campaign plans and ask any questions about it. We're available always via email to answer quick questions that may come up, and are happy to talk about, getting involved in our, so I should say we're also available in Circle to answer any questions that you may have. We really do extend every effort to make ourselves as accessible to our candidates as we possibly can.
Well said. Got another question in the chat here from Mike. how do we use the tool to filter voter file segments that aren't on the quick menu? So essentially, if you're looking for a custom voter file poll, or something that utilizes the voter file scores, modeling scores that are available, how could a candidate request that? And we designed the easy interface around the quick scores for the most common polls, but for custom voter file polls, Jared, how can a candidate work with Good Party Pro to do that?
Yeah, it's the quickest and easiest solution is if you have a very specific segment of your universe that you're looking to pull, or of your audience that you're looking to construct, email your rep and ask them if they can pull the data for you. They'll do it really quickly and are happy to upload that data into a shared accessible drive where we can throw a whole lot of information. Like Rob said, the data that we have in the product is intended for sort of the highest and best use, and we try and be thoughtful in which filters we make available to everyone based on how frequently it's requested. But there are absolutely things in the voter file that might be useful and specific. The example of newly registered voters is a great one. We will never turn down a request. We just we need it to come from the candidates, and we're happy to turn it around quickly.
Great. Sam Bowen states that his campaign ramps up next year in 2026. And he wants to know what steps he can take now to prepare for the best utilization of his voter file. He's in a countywide campaign in Fulton, Georgia, if that helps your answer, Jared.
I think that you can never start diving into the voter data too early, with the only exception that there are some races that might determine which assumptions you make based on elections that maybe haven't yet happened. So there are some candidates, for example, who are planning their elections in 2026. They reached out to us in 2024 before the last election, even year election. And our response was absolutely pull the data, start looking into it. But there's an election that is going to inform probably what you think about this data that hasn't happened yet. And so in response to your question, I think get into the voter file, get familiar with it, start to think about what campaign it is that you're going to run, and identify the audiences that you want to test. The benefit, I love this question because I think the benefit of a candidate who has got a lot of time is that you can actually walk a proverbial mile in the shoes of the candidate without having to actually have announced and sort of been this public facing figure, and you can use the data to inform that. So for example, you can start targeting and even just attending events, going and being and building a presence in your community, posting online without having formally announced your candidacy, and testing some of the themes of your campaign and using the data to identify which segments you should test with.
Mm-hmm. I see a question from Zion here. Can I get voter information updated to show engagement locally? His is only showing even year elections.
We can pull it for you. I think this is something that we're routinely running into and is on our roadmap to correct. We have the file is formatted to send even year elections, just given it's the most frequent participation or highest participation elections. But this would be an example. Zion, I know you. Send me an email. I'll pull the correct data for you and make sure that it's uploaded and you have access to it.
And I see another question about how can goodparty.org pro candidates find out who their PA or their rep is?
I'm sorry, say that one more time, Rob.
How can a Good Party pro candidate find out who their rep or political associate is?
They'll be reaching out to you. We were a little short-staffed, if only because we've got a few people out of office following the holiday. So you should be hearing back from us, though, no later than Monday of next week. And I will make sure after this call that I get everyone assigned and put them in your bucket.
Yeah, the other thing that I would say is that one of the fastest possible ways to get a response is in the customer service board on Circle. And this is another plug for our producers to drop the Circle link. But Circle automatically creates a service ticket and lets your PA know that you have a need for a solution on your end. So utilize that customer service board. Again, another question, this one coming from Wesley. I think we already kind of answered this one, but I'll reiterate, Jared. He's found that the data provided by the Board of Elections is often out of date. Can you talk about the way that our data, the way that we enhance that voter file data to ensure that it's accurate? Again, with the giant caveat that you're bound to find some inaccuracies. There's just the fact of life that people do move. If you have a high concentration of voters in apartments, for example, your turnover is going to be higher. But talk about the way that our voter file is more than likely better than what the Board of Elections would hand over.
Yeah, so the Board of Elections, I don't know of a single Board of Elections in the country that will like invest in the cleaning of their voter data more than once a year. There are some places that will produce reports on what's in the file, but it takes a lot of resource and time and investment to be able to enrich the data and make sure that it's up to date. And again, these companies will do that 4 times in the time that it takes the states to do one, and they will enrich it with information that the states don't have access to. And so the data should be more comprehensive. I mean, it certainly will be more comprehensive. It should be more accurate, and it will provide candidates the opportunity to get more in the weeds just because there's more in the file that's accessible to our candidates.
Yeah. Another question, can you cross-reference voter file data to get IP addresses? And I want to piggyback on this to say, Jared, can you talk a little bit about the way that our voter file can be used for the most common form of digital advertising that campaigns do, which is, of course, meta advertisements?
IP addresses, not so much. I think that's data that is not included in any consumer voter file that I'm aware of, but there are ways to absolutely get segmented and target people online. And in fact, it doesn't require as much information as you necessarily need. We have, or as you might think, we have a whole enrollment flow that we are actually testing in real time right now. So if there are any candidates who are interested in getting set up with meta advertising, this is a prime opportunity to reach out to your rep who is going to jump at the opportunity to help you get set up in advertising. And part of that is using the voter data, and in this case for Meta, uploading it into their platform. And the way it works is it looks for identifiers, your name, the address, the cell phone number, the zip code, and age is typically all you need of a voter, and it'll match it against their accounts that have been created across the platform. And it gives you an opportunity to create custom audiences and direct your advertising directly to those folks.
Awesome. Well, we have made it through the last of the questions that I see in the question bank. I want to take this opportunity to thank both Jared and Tevin for their time, and for all of you who attended this and asked such really great questions. A recording of this training will be uploaded to Circle tomorrow. So if you want to look over any of this or take notes on any pieces of this, you'll be able to find this in the GPA recording section of Circle. I do want to reiterate and ask everyone, join the community on Circle. We have the highest win rate across our candidates currently through the candidates who are actively participating in that community. I also want to put a plug and ask people to RSVP for our next training, which is again on July 24th. That will be phone banking and texting strategies. So a really timely training here. And Benko, I see where you said, I'm not sure what Circle is. There's a link right above. If you click on that link, it'll take you, it's our online community where we have free courses, where we have daily discussion prompts, where candidates are able to support one another. And we have dozens of free templates online. So check out Circle, join the community, and go ahead and RSVP for the next event. Until next time, this has been a lot of fun. I've been Rob Booth. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Tevin. And we will see you all down the road.